So let's say somebody gives you an unlimited budget to build yourself a gaming PC. What parts would you use, and would you be considerate with their money and go with more reasonable components? Well, the person funding this build is me, and it turns out I really don't like myself that much. So yeah, no budget for gaming and editing. Let's see if I made some good choices here. If you're looking for a really solid set of memory, the T-Force Delta RGB DDR5 memory kit by Team Group is one of the best on the market. It features a wide range of frequency options, from the basic starting at 5600 MHz and the more advanced sets going up to 7200 MHz. It also has smart RGB controllers that support a ton of different lighting effects and software, and it supports Intel XMP 3.0 for one-click overclocking. This kit is only $178 on Amazon, and if you're interested, you can check out the link below in the description. Alright, so getting into the CPU first, I've gone with the Intel i9-14900K, and it is the latest offering from Intel, and for a budget of less than an M3 Max MacBook Pro, it's definitely going to be my top choice. We've got 24 cores packed into the CPU, 8 of those being performance cores that can boost up to 6 GHz, which is absolutely nuts. It does come in at a whopping $619. However, another notable mention would be something like the Ryzen 7950X 3D, which is also a really solid option for a top CPU at the moment. But for editing and gaming, the 14900K is definitely going to be my first choice. And the motherboard we're going to be plugging this into is none other than the Z790 Hero from ASUS. We could have also gone with a Z690 from last generation to save some money, but I'm going with a more relevant board today because I don't plan on upgrading this PC anytime in the near future. This is a very solid option for a relevant motherboard, balancing both aesthetic and performance for a higher end build like we're doing today. This board definitely fits the bill, and for connectivity, it has everything you might need for gaming and editing. It does support one PCIe Gen 5 NVMe and has 4 additional PCIe Gen 4 slots in the typical locations at the top and the bottom of the board here. As for connectivity, we've got plenty of high-speed USB ports, onboard Wi-Fi 6E, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, and dual Thunderbolt Type 4 USB-C ports. This board is fully spec'd out and ready for whatever we can throw at it. It does also support Intel 12, 13, and 14th generation CPUs, so our 14th Gen i9 is going to be a solid pairing with this motherboard. For storage, we're going with a 2TB NVMe. This one is the MP600 Pro NH from Corsair. It is a Gen 4 drive with decently fast read and write speeds, and it's going to be more than enough for a C drive on this build. I wanted to go with a larger capacity Gen 5 drive, but at the time of this video, I couldn't get my hands on any, so we're going to have to settle until the Gen 5 NVMEs become more available in the future. For the memory, we're going with the Corsair Dominator Platinums in a 64GB kit at 6400 MHz CL32. We could have just as easily gone with DDR4, however, with the prices of DDR5 coming down so dramatically in the past year, I think it finally makes more sense to go with a high-frequency kit of DDR5 like we've gone with here. I really wanted to go with a 98GB kit like the Dominator Titaniums, which is two 48GB modules at 6600 MHz, but we really couldn't get our hands on a set for this project, so the Dominator Platinums in this 64GB kit are still going to be absolutely insane for gaming and editing, and pretty reasonable as far as pricing goes, coming in at about $319 US, which really isn't bad for memory at this speed. And with the final DIMM installed, that's our motherboard fully built and ready to go into our case. For the case, I wanted to go with something white to contrast the black components, but also aligning with the theme of the setup I'm going to be putting this PC build in. So the idea was to go with a mid-tower that has integrated RGB to adjust to the theme of the setup, but also big enough to where there's plenty of airflow and room to expand in case GPUs get larger in the future. So here I've gone with the Corsair 5000T in white. This is a pretty large case, measuring about 560 by 530 mil, or 22 by 21 inches, and this is one of the more premium cases from Corsair at the moment, coming in at about $400 US. It's actually a very impressive case. Now behind the rear panel, we're also going to be removing the hard drive cage, and inside is this little hidden cardboard box that comes with all of the screws we're going to need. And for now, we just need these screws to get our motherboard installed into the case. We won't be needing an I/O shield here since our motherboard does have one pre-installed, so we can just go ahead and lower the motherboard into the case at kind of an angle and make sure it's aligned with the standoffs and then secure it by screwing it in. With our motherboard now installed, we're actually going to be removing the 3 pre-installed LL120 fans here at the front because we are going with fans later on that are much more impressive than the fans that came with this case. With the fans now removed, we can actually go ahead and remove the included commander hub to clean up the back side of the case and make room for our new AIO that actually doesn't require the use of the commander hub, which brings us to one of the things I'm actually pretty excited to test out. So these are the new 120mm Corsair iCUE Link QX fans, and the technology in these is really impressive. It comes right out of the box as a stack of 3 fans that are joined together both magnetically and with these physical retention clips. You might also notice that there's no cables coming off of these fans, and that's because there's only one cable required to run this full stack of fans to the controller. On top of this, each fan has 34 RGB LEDs spread across 2 light zones on both sides. This means that the fans look great in both an intake or an exhaust configuration, and each fan has a built-in temp sensor and MCU to monitor the internal case temperature at the area where the fan is installed, which is pretty crazy. In the box, we also get an iCUE Link system hub, which is pretty much a new type of fan controller that allows the iCUE Link components to communicate with Corsair's RGB software. We do also get a PCIe power cable and a micro USB cable to connect our hub to our motherboard, as well as a single 600mm iCUE Link cable. And we are going to be pairing these with what I'm probably most excited about for this build, and that is this absolute unit right here. This is Corsair's iCUE Link H150i AIO, and it's definitely the highlight of today's build in terms of visuals and overall capability as a CPU cooler. It comes in at about $200 US, which is pretty reasonably priced for a higher end AIO that's this packed with features. In the box, we also get another iCUE Link hub and all the cables we need to get everything connected. And right out of the box, there's 3 pre-mounted QX fans, which is something I really like about this, because it saves us quite a bit of time not having to dig the fan screws out of the box and spending time getting those attached to the radiator. Also, you might notice there's no wires coming from this, where you would typically have a USB cable, power like SATA or Molex, and maybe a PWM cable, where this has the cables from the CPU block hidden and actually being run through the sleeved AIO cable and terminating at the distribution hub on the radiator, which is where you would actually link it to another component in the system, and that is super clean because the cables coming from the pump top are usually really noticeable and hard to manage. So before getting the AIO and fans installed into our case, I wanted to show you guys how all of this works and the basic layout of the iCUE Link components for our build. So we're going to grab our AIO, the exhaust fan, and our front stack of 3 intake fans, and all I'm going to do is attach the link cable to the AIO, and this one cable supplies component power, RGB, PWM, and temperature sensor data between the devices and back to the hub, so we really don't need any other cables other than this one link cable. The next thing to link would be our radiator fans to our exhaust fan, and again, that's just with this one cable. And keep in mind, you can link up to 7 devices per line and 14 per hub. So if you're running, for example, 7 fans and an AIO like we're doing in this system, only 1 hub would be required, and you can still add another 6 fans without needing another hub. For the final cable to complete the loop here, we could plug our link cable back into the hub from our stack of 3 fans on the right, or from our exhaust fan back to the hub, because the order really doesn't matter. We would also need to connect another link cable from the radiator back to the hub, and that's pretty much it, and we're good to get this installed into our system. The next component we'll be installing is our power supply. We went with the RM1200 shift from Corsair, and this is a great fully modular power supply at 1200 watts, 80 plus gold rating. This power supply is actually really cool due to the fact that the cables on this plug in from the back, allowing us to route our cables later on. And at 1200 watts, this is more than enough power for the components we'll be using, and it leaves us a bit of headroom for upgrades if we decide to go that route in the future, which means we can go ahead and slide this into our case and secure it with the 4 included screws. And from there, we can go ahead and start plugging everything in and get to work on our cable management. First, we'll need the 24-pin motherboard cable, 2 PCIe cables for the 12 VHP high power cables for the GPU, an additional PCIe cable to power our iCUE Link controller, and 2 EPS cables to power the CPU. With those all plugged in, I do think the included cable management channels in the 5000T are well thought out and super considerate, because every cable has a dedicated channel, and the case comes with plenty of additional Velcro straps and zip ties to get everything organized. And with our cables organized for now and out of the way, it's finally time to get our fans installed. It's pretty much like you would expect with any other fan installation, except due to the fact that they're so securely attached together as a stack of 3, we can actually be lazy here and install them with just 4 screws. 2 in each corner would be more secure than my future, and I'm pretty content with that. Now we just have to get our exhaust fan in, and we're ready to get our cooler installed. Next up, we've got our mounting bracket for our cooler, and this cooler does come with the LGA 1700 bracket that we need for this motherboard, but in case you're using a different cooler, you'll just want to make sure your AIO comes with an LGA 1700 bracket if you're using a Z790 motherboard, but otherwise the installation is pretty easy. You've got a mounting bracket that goes behind the motherboard, and some standoff screws that go into the bracket, and that's pretty much all we need to do for now. Moving on to the cooler, the installation is like any other AIO at this point. We just need to lower it into the case wherever you decide you want it, and for our build today we're going to be installing it at the top because having the radiator at the top will fill out this massive case a little bit better, and I think it would improve the overall aesthetic of our completed build. As for the pump block, we do have a few options as far as mounting and which direction the tubes will be facing. If we mounted it with the Corsair logo facing up, it would create a little bit of tension on the tube, so I decided to rotate it 90 degrees for a cleaner look. However, this does mean we're going to have to wipe the thermal paste off the block and reapply it because the thermal paste is pre-applied with the intention of the pump block being mounted in the default orientation, which isn't a big deal because I like to apply my own thermal paste anyways to ensure full coverage. And in case you're curious, the thermal paste we're using here is the MP9 mod paste from Mod My Mods. And it does come with some extra sensitive finger condoms for that added level of protection from certain activities. And it allows you to really get that thermal paste all over those hard to reach areas on the CPU. We really just want to make sure we've got a good spread here with that thermal paste, and it's okay to be a little sloppy with it. And once we're done, we can now just slap our CPU cooler on top of it and get it screwed right in. And finally, the last component we'll be installing is the GPU. And here I've gone with the RTX 4080, and this specific card is the ASUS ROG STRIX model, which is one of those cards that make you not want to check your bank account in the days following its purchase. It's priced at about $1,500 US, and it is one of the top cards you can purchase at the moment, with maybe the exception of a 4090. However, for the price difference of about $700 more for the 4090, we found it to only be about 15% faster in gaming on average, which means you would get more value out of a 4080 at about a 32 frame difference in most gaming scenarios. And I know these GPUs might be overkill for most people, especially with the price of these cards being so high. So another really good option here would be a 4070 Ti, and this card hits that sweet spot of the best value in terms of cost to performance and diminishing returns. And it's about $400 cheaper than the 4080 at an average of about 157 FPS, bringing the price per frame down to about $1.30 less than the 4080. However, in Apex at 1440p, the 4080 STRIX was hovering at just under 60 degrees. Pulling about 270 watts at peak, and staying at the 300 FPS frame cap consistently throughout an extended gaming session. As far as cooling goes, the system is actually really quiet. We couldn't get the system to exceed 36 decibels even when stressing the system in Furmark. With a room ambient of 25 degrees, we did see the CPU hit roughly 70 at one point, but it was hovering in the high 50s and 60s for the most part, and that's pretty good considering this is an AIO and not a custom cooling solution. And lastly, as an editing PC, we wanted to see how the 4080 stacks up against the 4090, and we were really surprised to see that it actually outperformed the 4090 in both live export and playback scores on Fusion Bench, and just 15 points overall below the 4090. The cooler on this card is absolutely massive, coming in at 358mm long, 3.5 slot design, 3 fans, and about 120mm of the backplate cut out to help assist with airflow even more, but despite its size, it's still pretty chonky. I'd say for most PC cases this would be a tight fit, but it really fits well in the case we've gone with here, and from there we can just plug it in with our 12 VHP cable we routed from the power supply earlier, and moving on to our last and final component for this build. I've actually decided to add an additional 8TB of storage with the ROG Hyper M.2 card that came with our motherboard, and it does support one Gen 5 NVMe as well as an additional Gen 4 NVMe, but for this build we're going with 2 additional 4TB MP600 Pros from Corsair, because 2TB wasn't going to be enough for video editing, as our files can take up to 1TB of storage for a single video. So with now 10TB of storage total in this system, I think I'll be good to go for a while. And installing this is actually pretty straightforward. We're just going to pop this into our second X16 slot under our primary slot for the GPU, and secure it to the case, and there it is. At this point, our build is finally complete.